What is peated whiskey? I'm going to tell you, because that's what I do here. I'm Daniel Whittington. I'm the Chancellor at Wizard Academy and Whiskey Marketing School. This is a bottle that I'll talk about in a second. There's many things I appreciate about this bottle. But first, it's, the curse of knowledge. I don't know if you've ever heard this. I might do a whole video about the curse of knowledge. Curse of knowledge is when you, the nose off of this glass, just like flooding this space. It's heady. Okay. Wow, it's all I can smell. Mike, can you smell that? Look. Count to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There's just this ashy smoke just filled the air. Man, okay.
Oh yeah, there it is.
Yeah, see? Good Lord.
That is strong.
Okay. Curse of knowledge is when you are so far deep into an understanding of something that you sort of assume everybody else knows things that are basic to you, but they're not basic to everybody else. And so when you start explaining or talking about something or teaching about it, instead of starting at step 1, you start at step 5. Because, of course, steps 1 through 4 can be assumed. Everybody knows what that means. Look, not everybody knows what that means. And when I give tastings to students who are not whiskey people at this campus, after class, when I talk about peated whiskey, every tasting, there are 2 or 3 people who are like, what is peated whiskey? What does that even mean? And it occurred to me, we really should cover that. What is peated whiskey? Okay, well, let's go back in time. Peat is an organic compound. It's a layer of, to simplify, wet dirt. It's wet enough that it stays damp and condenses, but not so wet that it's marsh or bog or swamp. Although you'll find peat beds on the edges of bogs and swamps. And it can be a bog, like a bog can be a bit, but you got to get drier edges in order to use peat the way that it's commonly used. It's not a scarce resource in the sense that it covers more of the earth than anything except water. So water covers the most surface area of the earth. Peat covers the next layer of the most surface area of the earth. Anywhere you find frozen tundra, it's basically underneath the ice a peat bed. And then, Scotland. Now, in the early days, historically, I don't know if you know this, Scotland and Ireland were forest. Solid wall of forest from shore to shore in every direction. That's not what you see in pictures these days, is it? At this point in Scotland, I think the last thing I Googled, it was like only 4% of Scotland has original woodlands. The rest of it is like being replanted. It's a huge movement in Scotland, the replanting of Scottish forests. Now, why? Well, we're talking, 1,000 years ago, but this is the era of Viking exploration and ships showing up. And so people would come in and they would just clear cut trees in every direction for shipwood and masts for boats and all of this stuff. And then when people moved in, they would clear cut things for farmland and stuff like that. And you had a weather pattern on these islands of a crap ton of humidity and rain. Well, when the land is all trees, that's fine. When you cut down all the trees that are soaking up the water, now you've just created bog and marshland. Right? Because you got all the water that used to be sucked up by trees, but it's now just sitting in the dirt. And instead of having dry dirt, you get this big. Now what happens over thousands of years is that you get the weight of organic matter getting waterlogged and then getting heavier and condensing on top of itself. And it increases at what is it? It's some astronomically small amount. It's like an inch every 1,000 years or something like that. I can't, that's wrong, but go look at it. It's incredible how long it takes to get an inch of true peat. And so when you live on these islands and you need to, cook things and heat your, hovel or your cabin or your castle, well, what if you have no forests anymore, what are you going to do? Well, the answer is you cut these dense mud bricks, you stack them, you let them dry in the air, and then you burn them as peat logs. And in the early days of Scottish whiskey and Irish whiskey, to make whiskey, you have to dry the barley. Like that's how you malted barley is. You get it to think it's start time to grow, and then you dry it in order to freeze the process so you can then ferment and make spirits. Well, before you have gas or electricity or coal fires, how are you going to dry barley? With a kiln and peat fire. And so there was an era, I mean, it's not proven, but there was an era where you could argue anything that was a barley spirit was smoky. Right up until we got electricity and gas and things like that, right? So think of it that there was an era of Scottish and Irish whiskey where all the whiskey was smoky. That's just how it was, because that's how you dried the grain. And then we got gas and electric, and smoke in your whiskey became a choice, and everything changed. We're going to talk about that in a second. This is a bottle that was gifted during some class by somebody who didn't write their name on the bottle. So if it's you, tell me, and I'll put it in the description. But I really wanted to try this one because this is from Glenallachie, which is the Billy Walker and his partners Trisha and Graham sort of like bought this distillery from Chivas, and it's a fairly recent distillery. It started in 1967, and then Billy Walker and his crew bought it. And Billy Walker is like a Hall of Famer, historical giant in the Scotch world. And you've probably been seeing Glenallachie bottles all over the market. They're in Total Wines. They're flooding they've got their range, and they're redoing their core range right now. Originally, he was working with product that was being made before he took over, but and when he took over in 2017, they started changing their cask management. That's what Billy Walker's famous for, a really brilliant work at cask management and changing of cask behavior, creating a whole new product. He did it with Glendronach when he was a part of the Glendronach Benriach, Glenglassaugh, actually. And but he applied this to the Glenallachie. Now, the first Glenallathies that I had were okay. Not bad, not truly life-changing, just like, yeah, that's fine. We're starting to finally get some things that Billy Walker was responsible for from start to finish. And one of the things is that in 2018, they started producing peated Scotch at the Glenallachie distillery. I think it represents, was it 20% of production or something like that? Anyway, as this started to get to the age where it could be released, which I think this is 5 years, it is 5 years old, which is young for Scotch, they created a whole separate line. So if you Google this, you have to, it's not obvious until you get the bottle or you really do your reading that it's coming from Glenallachie, because on the internet, it's a whole new brand called Meikle Tòir. Meikle Tòir. Now, I love that they have that Gaelic name on there. I also love that in small print right here, they put how to pronounce it. I wish more people did that. I mean, crying out loud. The Bunnahabhain bottles with some of their names that needs that phonetic translation on the bottom. So this helps you make you not feel stupid saying the name of the distillery. It means big pursuit. And the idea was to create at this Speyside distillery a really brilliant peated Scotch. And man, it's so young. The peat smoke is still so strong on this thing. I would love to put this up against Ardbeg Wee Beastie, which is also 5 years old, and just see what happens. But man, I poured this, and then that peat smoke just flooded this space. It's intense. This one is the Turbo. I think there's 3 in the line. This is 50% alcohol. Sorry, I got hiccups. 2023 edition, 71 ppm. That's a peat measurement. We're going to talk about that in a second. So, outside of that really ashy smoke, man, this is Isla level, like, but it's meaty. It's got this, like, I don't know where the peated barley is coming from, but it's got this weightiness to it that's more like woodlands and earth and smoke than it is like coastal brine. It is a heavy smokiness mixed with mulch, and then finally I'm starting to get some of the classic fruit and sweetness of barley aged or barley made spirits, but it is dominated by full decomposing organic forest matter and wood smoke from a campfire in the woods. Did you see that? I pulled it back like this and just a little drop flung out the side. All right, I'm gonna try a sip of it. I keep putting it off. Wow. Honey cream smoke. Whoa, that is going forever. It's still going. Oh, the phenolic cling is very real. Man, dude, if you're looking for like a delicate, nuanced, smoky scotch, this is closer to the level of like the Octomore and like the young Ardbegs that are full of, but like, this is a whiskey with something to prove. Right now, all I'm getting is just the beginnings of that kind of like youthful vanillin over a soft fruit, but it's just obliterated by campfire smoke and ash. This is drama. This is high drama. Woo! Kind of nutty, too. I'm going to add some water to this. I'm going to add quite a bit of water and see what happens. Okay, so coming back to peat, you can choose your peat levels these days. You can decide whether you want an unpeated whiskey. And actually, the vast majority, this is the irony of Scotch. When non-Scotch drinkers think of Scotch, they think of smoky whiskey. If you talk to a bourbon person who doesn't like Scotch, like, I don't like smoky stuff. But the vast majority of Scotch produced in the world is not smoky. But yet, smoky whiskey is the hallmark of like the cloak that most outside consumers wrap Scotch in. But you can choose it now. And not only can you choose it, you can choose levels of peat impact because we can get that accurate these days. So before it was just like, we put it in the kiln, we dry it until it's dry. Now they do things like they have big barrel kilns where you have these bins that just sort of roll and turn barley, and it's heated and it comes in damp and comes out the other end dry. And when you're doing that, you can control how much smoke, you can control how long it spins in that bin. You can do this in kilns too, but we now, these days with modern equipment, have way more control over exactly how much phenolic compound smoke we want that barley to absorb. Even when we were smoking our own barley over here on the property at Crowded Barrel, we could control that too by just continuing to damp the barley. And so wet barley absorbs smoke. If you put dried barley and then you added smoke, you'll get this sort of veneer of smoke on the barley, but when you grind it up and ferment it, and most of it goes away. But if you dampen the barley, as it dries, it absorbs all that smoke, then you get a whole new thing. But here's the thing that you need to pay attention to when it comes to peated whiskey. When someone says something like 71 ppm, which is phenolic parts per million, peat parts per million, it's usually, I don't know about these guys, it's usually talking about a measurement taken of the barley before it's fermented and distilled. And the irony of that is that you can actually distill smoke out by where you make your cuts. Because all of those smoky compounds in the grain, they all live towards the tail end of the cuts on a still. Remember our copper pot distillation video, here's cuts, right? And if not, then go look it up on the channel. All of those heavy, low phenolic compounds live in the tail end of the cuts. And so you can actually run a still and then cut so high on the tails that you eliminate the vast majority of the smoky compounds. You can take the smokiest barley on planet Earth and then cut it into a light, delicate, nuanced, peppery spirit. Now the loss is going to be astronomical, but you can do it. And that's why I feel it's sometimes a little misleading to say, here's the ppm of the barley that went into the spirit, because it changes completely based on your cuts of distillation. So you could have, this is a less ppm, or more ppm than, say, Lagavulin or, Ardbeg's standard practices, and it tastes like it, but if they could have made their cuts a certain way and it wouldn't, it could be more mild. And a perfect example of that is, I think it's Lagavulin and Kalila that use the same barley, same level of smoked barley, but they make different cuts and they have different fermentations and age processes, and so you get a completely different smoke vibe from the final product, right? So just because the grain comes in at 71 ppm doesn't mean that, like, if you get 71 ppm barley, you can make whiskey this smoky. It also depends on where you cut it, and that's something that you need to pay attention to. But the real answer to the question is peated whiskey is whiskey that tastes smoky, and the smoke is coming from peat. That's it. This could have been a real short video. Ooh, hey, okay. With a little water, all the fruit notes kind of popped out a little bit. It's still dominated by smoke and char and ash, but it's not just honey now. There's some other things happening. In the palate, though, woo! All the vegetal notes that come along with those low-end cuts are present. I love to try this at 10. It's really an experience at 5, which I also enjoy. But yeah, I'd buy it again. Just to rock someone's world with the smoky Speyside. Because why not? Cheers to you all. I hope that was helpful, and I'm really glad you're here. If you want a channel that is all 1000 ppm, then like and subscribe.